Hello everyone, welcome to my review of Final Vendetta, a brand new beat 'em up that came out the same weekend as the Turtles Shredder's Revenge beat 'em up that is getting so much attention and praise, and people are talking about it, it's the greatest thing ever made, and beat 'em ups are back, which is fine, if people want to feel that way, but I think it's a little bit funny and sort of ironic. They're all going on about how beat 'em ups are back, they're kicking ass, and yet they don't review Final Vendetta, don't really talk about it that much. And all the reviews of Final Vendetta are kind of like, yeah, it's a beat 'em up, 7 out of 10. I've gone through and sort of read the critical evaluation of the game. This is something I might start doing with most of my reviews going forward, just because I think it's fascinating to talk about, at least with arcade style games that get coverage. And a lot of the reviews were saying there's nothing necessarily that bad about it, but it doesn't have magic secret sauce to make it a great game, so it kind of might as well not even exist. That was the vibe I was getting, and I don't agree with this perspective of how arcade games should be viewed and evaluated, because really, if you go ahead and you go through a lot of the reviews of arcade games, what they almost always hone in on is the polarity mechanic of the game, or the real hook of what makes a game distinctive from other arcade games, because I think sometimes reviewers can't really tell the difference between arcade games without that sort of thing. So for example, if you read an Ikaruga review, and I have a whole video sort of going over these reviews and talking about them, every single one is going to talk about how the polarity mechanic is a puzzle element and how Ikaruga is actually kind of a secret puzzle game. And you'll see this with a lot of reviews of arcade games where they're really searching for that central mechanic. And if you're looking for that with Final Vendetta, I don't think you're going to find it, other than, I guess, maybe some of the crazy exploits and fun things you can do. But why I am heavily recommending this game is because when I picked it up last week, I ended up playing it for about 15 hours to get the review footage, to get my sort of teeth into the gameplay and have a real solid foundation of what I'm talking about. And normally in that stage of the review, I've played it for a long time, I've got all the footage I need, I've done everything I need to do as a reviewer, I will usually move on because I have a giant pipeline of projects coming at me constantly that I need to get through. But Final Vendetta, it got its hooks in me, and I kept playing the game even when it no longer made sense as a review. I went ahead, I got clears with all 3 characters. I'd planned to continue to play the game and get ultra clears with all 3 characters because I can't put the game down. And since I put it on my Switch, one of its strongest advantages is playing beat 'em ups on it, because I think beat 'em ups are very good as handheld games. Shmups not as much because of the tiny screen and all that, but beat 'em ups, that's not an issue. And so I've been practicing and playing the game. I probably have put 30 hours into Final Vendetta at this point, and I'm still going and I'm still finding stuff. I think the issue with this game is like the polar opposite of Ikaruga, or maybe if you want to even go there, Shredder's Revenge. On the surface, you look at Ikaruga, and this is not anything against Ikaruga. Oh, you throw a polarity mechanic in a shmup and now it's amazing. That's not how it works. But I think that's what reviewers were looking for Final Vendetta. They didn't find it, so they're like, okay, move on, pass. Final Vendetta is actually one of those games where the more you play it, the more you get into it, the more you start to understand the combat system, all the tech and mechanics, and this thing's got like a list of attacks and mechanics and tech. I went through and played 10 hours not even knowing all the tech in the game. Once you start getting deeper and deeper into the level design, into the enemy design, into the boss fights, into the mechanics, the game really opens itself up more and more and more. And I find it a really deep and surprisingly well-made game from a Western beat-em-up studio. And let's be honest, Western studios have always struggled a little bit with the arcade genres, with shmups, with beat-em-ups. They really struggle a lot of the times to nail the fundamentals of the genre and make those fundamentals sound and fun. And Final Vendetta really does that for me. So let's get into the mechanics of the gameplay and what I think really stands out about it, and why I disagree with the other reviews that are saying, oh, it does nothing new or nothing interesting. So on the movement side of things, you actually can go into a full run in the game, double tapping, you go into a run like Streets of Rage, and when you let off, you instantly stop. There's no inertia, there's no sliding, you instantly stop. So you can set up all these very precise movements and maneuvers but you're also moving around the screen quickly instead of just slowly walking around. So the run mechanics are well thought through, they're well made. And then on top of that, you've got the throw system. There's all kinds of fun stuff, and they're character specific as well. So with different characters, you can pummel them, you can go into different combo strings out of the throws. Like Duke has a string where either he'll reset them if you do close up, and that kind of puts them in a nice reset loop or does a lot of damage. Or if there's people coming in on you and you want to crowd control, if you hold forward, he'll end his pummel string on his grab with a kick, and you can sort of crowd control with the kick. And the game has a lot of tools like that work really well. And once you get a feel for it, the flow of the game starts to come together and the gameplay starts to really pick up. I was going through and reading some of the Steam reviews and some of the things people were saying, and people were saying, oh, it's a slow, old, stiff beat 'em up. No, it's not. It's absolutely not that. And just on top of that, what they went ahead and did is they beefed up the sidestep in the game, and I really liked this choice. So usually when you play older beat 'em ups that have a side roll, like Streets of Rage has this side roll mechanic, it's good, it's useful, but it's always kind of a little bit funky and clunky and very situational. In this game, the sidestep is buffed to the point where you can sidestep around really smoothly and cleanly, and it comes in handy in the boss fights, it comes in handy in crowd control. It just really opens up the movement system of the game. So I love the beefed up sidestep, I love the runs, I love the grabs, I love the combos. Then there's a Desperation super, and I think the way this works is really cool. So if you have your Desperation attack, if you hit whatever button combination, I'll show this chart on screen because I lose track of what buttons do what, but you hit your Desperation attack and it does a hell of a lot of health damage to you based on how much your super meter is full. So if you have a full super meter, it does no damage to you. Empty super meter, it takes a lot of damage. If you have sort of like a half super meter, it'll take less health. I think that is the way it works. Hopefully that's the way it works. And what's really cool about this system is this game has a real authentic beat 'em up vibe that you just don't see in many modern beat 'em ups these days. Because most modern beat 'em ups do not want to be too punishing on you. They don't want to really emphasize positioning, damage mitigation, and sort of making these hard choices at times. Usually they want to hold your hand and make it so that you have 1,000 chances to get out of a situation. Whereas in this game, if you're sitting in the corner, you have already made the mistake and now you must be punished. And so the question is, how are you going to wiggle out of this? Can you figure out a strategy to get out? Or do you have to just eat the damage and do a Desperation attack? Or what's going to be the best option there? And I can see some players being frustrated with this style of design, but for me, I absolutely love it. I think it's engaging. I think it's fun. I think having that danger element to the enemies and to the design is really a fundamental element of beat 'em ups that takes them to the next level. And so that's the Desperation attack system. And then you have a special attack and block. So a word on block, don't worry about block. And then you have the special attack system, and they're all very good because they all really help the characters with different positioning situations. So Duke's, in the version you're seeing I'm playing here, is actually broken because you can do cancels out of it and stuff, and you can like loop it and chain it together infinitely. By the time you guys pick up the game though, it has just been patched, so that will no longer be available to you. So normally what Duke's special attack does, it's a great way where if you get a bunch of enemies sort of piled up together, attack them all at once in this big massive string where you're not having people fall out or try and get around you. And same thing with Claire's Hadoken, where it's really good for playing keep out with enemies with longer limbs, but also it's really good where when you pack up a bunch of enemies together and you want to deal with them in unison with one another, the special Hadoken really works for that. Miller's special attack, this sort of cloud thing he punches out there, what's really great about that is it has this really long active hitbox on it and it knocks things down. So what you can do is you can let it out and you can start sidestepping around it and kind of use it sort of like a sonic boom that Guile does in Street Fighter, where you can use it to position and keep people out because Miller is slow and clunky. The playstyles of the special attacks and the playstyles of the characters, I think they match together really well. You can use them in different combos. Don't neglect the special attack is what I'm saying. And then from there's another mechanic that I really liked a lot, and I hope more beat 'em ups start doing this. And I don't think this is the first game to do it, but normally in a beat 'em up, what happens is you're fighting an enemy, you knock them down, and once they're down on the ground, they're fully invulnerable. And then you have to sort of set yourself up, Okazeme style, for fighting game players. And usually what's kind of ironic about this in a lot of old school beat 'em ups is knocking the enemy down is actually not that advantageous of a position because they get so much iframes and so many things can happen while they're on the ground. So instead, what you can do in a lot of old school beat 'em ups is do these crazy stun lock combos. So I'll show in Batman Returns, for example, you can guard cancel your punches. And so you can leave the enemy standing and then you can just hit them and hit them and hit them and kill them without knocking them down. That's usually actually a much more effective method of crowd control. Sailor Moon has the same thing where you do turnaround cancels. The original Final Fight has the same thing, turnaround cancels. What's interesting about Final Vendetta though, and it shows that the developer is well aware of the strategies of the genre, is Final Vendetta does not actually allow you to do these punch cancel, stun cancel things. They want you to play more honestly. And what I like about that is usually the problem with these types of games like Final Fight, for example, is they're a little bit over centralized to the point where you kind of have to use them. You'd be stupid not to. But since Final Vendetta recognizes, okay, we don't want you to do turnaround punch cancels the entire time, that really actually opens up the gameplay more to more traditional styles. And now you're actually having to engage with the frame data of your attacks a little bit more and that sort of thing. Where in a lot of old school beat 'em ups, you can circumvent all of that just by learning punch cancels. But getting back to the knockdown system, what can make that kind of boring is you do a full combo and you kind of don't really get as much of a payoff as you would have if you're able to stun lock them or find other workarounds because they're sitting on the ground. But what's cool about Final Vendetta is with your special attack, if you stand over them, you can actually kick them. And kicking them is really cool for two reasons. One, it damages them, so you can actually finish off a lot of enemies by doing a combo. They hit the ground, you can walk over and kick them and just kill them by kicking them to death. But what's more cool about it is that it will reset them in different ways. So usually if you're kicking them with enough kicks, depending on the enemy, it'll stand them back up. And so you can get around this issue of you're knocking enemies down and then they're just laying on the ground and then you're sort of waiting for them to become active again. I thought that was a really cool way to keep the momentum of the combat going and keeping it fresh and fun. So overall, combat system wise, I really liked everything they did. I liked all the design decisions. I wouldn't really change too much about the combat system. I thought it came out super well. On top of that, the game isn't just well made in terms of combat. I also think it's very well made in terms of its level design. So we talked about this with Shredder's Revenge, and I do know that I was more critical of that game than basically anyone else. That being said though, even IGN pointed this out. So if IGN is pointing this out, and I'm pointing it out, usually that means no matter where you are in terms of reviewing stuff, this is an issue, which is in Shredder's Revenge, the level design by the end becomes bloated, it becomes sort of messy and ugly and absolute grind if you're trying to go for no death clears, as I've heard. So what I really love about Final Vendetta, it's got a really nice pace to the level design where there's a good amount of stages, about 40 minutes worth, 30 minutes worth, that you would get in a classic arcade game. And they've got different zones, they've got different areas, they flow together super nicely. There's no level of the game that I dislike, that I think is poorly made. Probably my least favorite area of the game is the docks, but the docks still are solid. And of course, with arcade game design, there's always that one stage with that little extra jank, that little extra weirdness. But even what I would consider the weakest stage of the game, I think is solid. And it wasn't like I was rolling my eyes by the time I got to it. So overall, I think the tightness of the combat, the tightness of the stage design, all of the elements as far as the core gameplay and the real attention to detail, the developer definitely kept an eye on the main fundamentals and really, I think, did an excellent job. And I think there's a lot of potential here. There's real talent here with this beat 'em up, and I don't say that very lightly. So that being said, let's talk about some other controversial aspects of the game that I think will be interesting. One of them was that the developer decided, at least on initial release, and I think this has been patched, but initially on release, it was decided you have to 1cc the game on hard mode. I actually really liked this decision. I thought it was a really smart decision. Here's why. shmups have run into the issue of the credit feed in reviews and with new players. So what happens is, and you can see a lot of old shmup reviews were like this in the 360 days, they'd buy the game, they'd credit feed it for 30 minutes, then they'd say, done. Game complete. You know, they considered credit feeding it. As long as you get to that end screen and you saw all the enemies and bosses, you have completed the game. And so a lot of people would undervalue the game in terms of the content and stuff there because they would just credit feed their way to the end and move on. Well, the developers, you know, there's different ways to deal with this, but I think one way to deal with it that I appreciate is just, no, you can't credit feed. So now you have to re-experience the game in an arcade sort of setting. And with a beat 'em up, I think it's totally fair to do this. I don't think beat 'em ups are as punishing as shmups, difficulty-wise, as much. And so going through and replaying the stages in the beat 'em up, I think is very fair because not only are you learning the initial stages better, but you're learning the combat system better. And so, for example, it took me 4 or 5 tries to get the 1cc, and I learned each time along the way. And what's really cool is that the game isn't as cruel as reviewers are saying. If you read the initial reviews, everyone's like, this is for hardcore players only. You need to be the greatest beat 'em up player of all time to like this game. I don't think it was particularly difficult in terms of beat 'em up. I mean, it was tough, but I don't think it was out of the ordinary difficult or anything. And also, the game gives you a crap load of resources to work with. So instead of starting the game with 2 lives, it just gives you a bunch of extends up front. And I thought this was a really good compromise. So it's like, okay, we're not going to make you learn how to do scoring things and stuff like that to get the majority of your extends. We're just going to give them to you. So you have those to play with. But at the same time, we're not going to let you just credit spam your way to the end. A lot of reviews were saying, well, this game needs some sort of stage select in order to make this feasible because, you know, you have to practice the stages and everything, which I agree with. And the funny thing is that there is a stage select. The game has one. It's just hidden behind a code. So I'm not going to fault reviewers too much for overlooking that, but there is actually a stage select. It's hidden behind a code. Not only is there a stage select, there's also a boss select. Now, there's training mode, which is fun. That's kind of like a Street Fighter 4. You have enemies come in and you can practice against them and stuff. But outside of that, you can actually play the bosses in their stage context by going to the hidden menu, selecting the stage, then you go to boss rush, and it will boss rush onto the stage you selected. So that's how I practiced the final boss over and over, was using the hidden stage select. So that was cheeky of them to hide it, but it is in there at least. The code is you hold left, you press X and B if you're playing on a Switch or whatever, and then you hit start on the while your cursor's on the options menu, that opens the hidden menu. And it also has infinite health. So if you really are mad about it not allowing you to credit spam your way through, you can just infinite health your way through it. I mean, what's the difference? So many people complain about this in reviews, and so many people complain about this in Steam reviews. I think the developers were like, all right, fine. I thought it was pretty cool that they initially decided, no, we're going to take a bold step here and make you actually play the game and get your money's worth out of it before you just play it for half an hour and discard it. So I have no issues with the continuation system. I thought it was a fun idea. Another critique that I've heard of the game is with the game's visuals and animations, and I do share some critiques with this one. So one critique that some people have said is that the animations are a little too similar to Final Fight and other beat 'em ups that it was inspired by. And I thought this was interesting because I have a bit of a different outlook on this. And then I also got a really fun theory about it from Boghog. So my outlook on this is, when it comes to these dead, old ass IPs that have been left in history that we all love, arcade players love, I personally don't have any issue with heavy borrowing from those games as long as they're legally distinct to where you're not going to get sued. To me, I actually think it's kind of refreshing to see a new IP that is trying to follow up in spirit on these dead IPs and doing their best to do so and being incredibly alike to the originals. I have no problem with any of that. As long as you make it legally distinctive enough not to get sued, I think that's perfectly fine, because in these cases, it's almost kind of refreshing. Because, like, let's say you're making an unofficial attempt to follow up Final Fight and Streets of Rage. In that case, you have to deliver on the gameplay. You have to deliver in quality. You can't ride on top of the IP and just funnel crappy gameplay into the IP and be like, well, there you go. there's the sequel. And we see this over and over again across these old school genres where someone buys the IP, then they make some shitty follow-up, but because it bears the name of the IP, it naturally gets recognition. Where this sort of strategy of, okay, I'm going to follow up the IP with my own, but it's going to have to deliver on the gameplay side of things and quality for people to take it seriously, I have no problem with that. And then Boghog's theory was that the reason why the animations, he suspects that they actually programmed the game using sprites from the beat 'em ups, and then they realized, because beat 'em ups are so sensitive to hitbox and animations and making them make sense, they realized, oh crap, we tied all of these attacks and animations to the old sprites and their animations, and so we would either need to recode all the attacks and animations, which would break the balance of the game, or we need to kind of have extremely similar animations, basically. And I think that's a very good theory, and I agree that's probably what ended up happening and why the animations are so similar, because they probably did use placeholder sprites from the original. The visuals are solid. I think a lot of the elements of the game are very well done as far as the sprite art and giving you that sort of Neo Geo feel, and I think that's what they were going for. And for me, it works. I love the Neo Geo. I love this style. It definitely does remind me of Final Fight and those types of games. My critique, though, is that in comparison to the Neo Geo originals, in comparison to stuff like SNK and sort of the source material they're borrowing from, I think a lot of the designs are a little bit underwhelming. They're a little bit flat. They don't quite have enough flair. So what I think would be cool if they're trying to patch things and add things is if they sort of worked on these sprites a little bit and sort of touched them up, especially Claire. Let's admit it, Claire's sprite is a little bland. It's a little boring. They went in there and sort of beefed it up SNK style. For the most part, I do like the way Duke and Miller look, but still I think all the main characters and all the enemies could use just a little touch up, a little extra flair, because I do think they're a little flat. But all that being said, now let's sort of summarize what you have on offer here. So you have Final Vendetta, which comes with an incredible arcade mode, very, very faithfully well made in terms of the genre, in terms of that genuine delicious gameplay feel where it's all about trading hitboxes back and forth and really tactical positioning, and if you're messing up, you are gonna get your ass punished and you're gonna remember, okay, I cannot position myself this way in the future. Not a lot of get out of jail free cards. Excellent there. I do think it is bringing new ideas together in a way that I think is compelling and not something you're going to easily find, you know. Bringing them together in this unique IP, I think really works. The sum total of all the individual parts, I think, is greater than the individual parts, if that makes sense. So like the ability to be able to run and then have this great grab game like in Final Fight, and then being able to knock them to the ground and then have the ability to kick them and have some sort of ground attack meta game on top of that. And Miller has a really cool one because he can come in and pile drive enemies, and he has a really distinctive, cool ground game because of that. But all those elements keep the flow of the gameplay up tempo, and then being mindful of exploits and being sure they're not too over centralizing. And I know there's going to be exploits in the game, but it seems like the devs are pretty on top of patching them. And so before we get to the conclusion, I have one last message specifically for the developers of the game. So I'm talking to you devs, which is, please, I am begging you, please make a sequel. And the reason why I decided to include this plea to you is because I'm not just trying to be a fanboy or anything like that. The reason why is because modern indie game developers do not make direct sequels anymore. They don't seem to do this. It's just not in their blood. So in the past, Final Fight 1 comes out. It's excellent. Everyone's digging it. Capcom looks to the Final Fight team and says, good job, boys. Get your ass working on Final Fight 2. And then get working on Final Fight 3. Because of the way the arcade system infrastructure worked, having this iterative design across time was natural. And so all of the great arcade franchises, all the great classics of the genre are usually the products of, we made one beat 'em up, then we made a second beat 'em up, and then we made a third beat 'em up, and we learned the lessons and improved things from each game to another, to make a strong series by the end. The problem with modern indie games is that modern indie developers, they make a great game. And everyone's like, oh, this is really great, beat 'em up. And then they're like, what do you do next? I don't know, I'll make a farming sim next or something. Like that iterative across time design in the indie space doesn't exist. And it can get kind of a bummer where you get the one studio has this flash of brilliance with the beat 'em up with Final Vendetta, and then that's it. It's just the one and done model. So I'd really love it to see a follow-up where you've got the stuff, you've got everything in place now, done the legwork of making Vendetta 1. Now you can use a lot of the basis of what you did and make a sequel called Vendetta 2. And then people can play it and it can grow as a series and you can do more things and experiment and make a bigger, more powerful product. But just having the one game and then that's the end of it, I think it's a bummer, especially of beat 'em ups. You know, poor beat 'em ups, people make one beat 'em up and then that's it. So I think the team has a lot of talent and I would love to see a follow-up to this. I absolutely recommend Final Vendetta. I think it was a blast. I've played it for 30 hours now. If that's not a seal of approval, I don't know what is. The price point, I will admit, at 25 bucks is a little steep. Not that I don't think it's worth it, but convincing more non-hardcore beat 'em up players that 25 bucks is worth it might be a bit difficult, even though it has the great arcade mode with all the different difficulty selections, the training mode, and the survival mode. Survival mode is really fun as well. Despite having all of this and 3 distinct characters and having, I think, plenty of stuff in the game to justify 25 bucks, I just fear, you know, maybe a $20 price tag might be a little bit easier, though I recommend it at full price. So yeah, please like, subscribe, share with your friends. Adios, everyone. So thank you to the $5 patrons, 100, Dingo, Another Joe, Anthony A, Anthony Iodice, Aaron Solis, Asa Davis, Bo, Ben, Borgie22, Brian Shiver, Chris Yusufovich, Chris Perry, Climby Coyote, Cook Some Soup, Corey Mark, Des Ardio, Dark Wing, Darren Griffin, Delta Tango 6, Disco Stas Leia, DJ420, Praise It, Eric H, FCK Full Set, Retro Schmupper, Hausu, Kiwi, JLab, JB RPG, Jim Knockham, John Kelly, Jolts, Gameboy Guru, K, K2, Kikoman 589, Corbin, Larridge, Malaise, Mark Toms, Mataroso, Matthew Derrigis, Maz, Megadeth 859, Minung, Michaelin, Michael Stum, Mitchell Y, Queen Charlene, Nathaniel Davis, and Electron, Neon Dagger Games, Oglekugels, Philip Mason, Rattlecat, Raul, Rilskeen, Riff Mason, Rolf015, Scanline City, 7 Overdose, Shmup Junkie, Silas, Space Photus, Stadium Arts, Steve Fiction, The Boot Rex, The Real Ikuzo, The Dirty Screech, The N1, The Old Bensta, TRM, Zugumo, Twilight EX, Wabby Legs, X20 Spec, Plasmo, and Utakaya. Thanks for watching.